Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today we're going to Masechtas Nazir daf Mem Gimel. We are going to begin on the bottom of Mem Beis Amud Beis, 3 lines from the bottom. Aval Tumah V'Tumah Lo. So we were discussing this whole notion of Tumah V'Tumah based on the Mishnah we saw in yesterday's daf, that if you're a Nazir and you become Tameh, and they keep warning you, Al Tatama, and every single time you still continue to come in contact with a mace, so you're chayv al kol achas v'achas. And we said, how is that possible? If you're already tameh, so then why would you be tameh again? You're already tameh. So we said in yesterday's daf, our Mishnah is shalol b'chiburin, is because at the time that you touched mace number 2, you were not touching mace number 1. And therefore, because you are no longer in contact with the first mace, so therefore we say that by you touching a second mace now, then you're actually going to be chayiv. However, if it would be b'chiburin, namely that it's all happening b'vasachas, that you're holding a mace on your shoulders, let's say, and you touch another mace in the process, so you're only going to be chayiv for one. Because the pasuk said, v'yichalel, and it's only someone who was not already profane. But if you were already muchul omed, so then we're not going to say at that time that you are going to be chayiv again. So on this, the Gemara wonders, Aval Tumah V'Tumah Lo. So you're telling me, again, if a person is tameh, and while he's holding on to this mace, he touches another mace, that he's not going to be chayiv twice. Why? Because the Hamed Tameh V'Kayim, because he's already tameh. So since he's already tameh, so we're not going to say that he's going to be chayiv again because of Ulichalel. So for the Gemara, Tumah Nami Hamed Tameh V'Kay. Why did we mention above that in a situation, and this was actually a machlokas Rabbi and Rav Yosef, how to interpret the words of Rav Huna, that when a person becomes tameh, and there's also an isser of lo yavo, because the pasuk says lo yitami and lo yavo, don't enter into the location where there's a mace. It tells you that there's an isser, even though you may be tameh, you're still chayiv for lo yavo. So the question is, if that's the situation, as Rabbi cites it, it's hard to understand, because if you already tameh, so then why would we say by you going to Ol HaMeis it's any different? You shouldn't say that you're going to be chayiv twice. Says the Mefarish, Kodim shenehel v'oihel, since you're already tameh before you went into the ohel, you're my mechayiv. Why are you chayiv again? V'inami mechivan denechnas ba'oihel shemei sham havilei tameh v'chi hader naga my chayiv. So why then do we say, just like if you're tameh, but you let go of the mace, and then you touch another mace that you're chayiv, so then why is that a case where you're chayiv? But when you're tameh, and then you walk into a place where there's a mace, and there's ohel tumah, so why in that situation are you chayiv twice? It shouldn't, they're two separate things. So the Gemara says as follows, Rav Yochanan kan b'bayis kan b'sada. One is in a house, and one is in a field. So in a house, obviously there's an issue of a roof, which is an ohel tumah. In a field, there's no issue. So let's start off by looking at the Mefarish. So ki amrinan anan dechayev al bia v'al hatuma. Why are you chayev for both, being tameh and then going in? Going to nichnas b'bayis, because you go into a house. Shehameis l'tocho. The tumah ubia b'hadi adadi asyan. At that time, the tumah and the bia is at the same time. V'idach the amran yatzazeh shemachul of oimed kagun shenag b'meis shebesada. You touched the mace in the field. V'hader nichnas ba'oihel, and then you went into an oihel. Shemeis tachtav the pater lefi shekvar hu machul v'oimed. So if, let's say, for example, again you're in a field, so in which you violated only becoming in contact with a mace, but not ohel a mace, and then all of a sudden afterwards you go into a house. So in that situation, so you're going to, rather into a field, So you were in a field, you touched the mace number 1, and then afterwards you go into an ohel. So in that situation, since afterwards you go into an ohel, so you're going to be potter because you're already mechul v'oimid. However, the case where they both happen b'vasachas, where you violate becoming tamei ein lo yavo, because you're coming in at the exact same time, so therefore you're only going to be chayiv once and not twice. If you look at Taisus, kan b'bayis, nichnas b'bayis shebatocho meis lo nitma koydem l'chein. So this is Taisus says clean that you were never tamei, you were a tar completely. You enter into a house which has a mace. Oz lo k'shtayim al lo yitama v'al lo yavoy b'bial beis boy shtayim olav. Because when you went in, you did both acts. You were tahar, and then you became tamei, so you violated of lo yavoy, and you violated lo yatama at the same time. So therefore, when it comes to a house, so at that time, since you were tahar, then you became tamei, and you violated both, so you're chayiv for both. However, says Taisus, kam b'sada, komer, kol toma v'toma b'loi oil. Anytime when there's no ohel, the first time you became tamei, lo mishkachas sh'nischayiv shtayim b'vasachas. Shahar im naga b'beis meisim b'vasachas. We know if let's say you touch 2 dead bodies at the same time, kul echad hasrahi. That's all the same thing. V'im haya tayin meis al ksefo. Let's say you're carrying a mace on your shoulders, like we saw before. V'hisrubal toma v'ishitu lo meis acher mechul v'oimidu. In that situation, as we said, based on the pasuk of lo yechalel, that you're not going to be chayiv for the second one because you're already considered to be mechul v'oimid. The enkan toisefes tuma min hasheni. So it's just not giving a different interpretation as far as the differences. It just explains it a little bit differently. But again, when we're dealing with going into a house, we're talking about a situation where you were tahar, and then when you enter, you do both violations, so you're chayiv both. However, in a situation where you first became tamei because you touched the mace in a field where you did not violate lo yavo, and then afterwards you violate lo yavo, so since they happened at separate times, but you were already tamei, so you're mechul v'oimid, so therefore you're not going to be chayiv for lo yavo. So that's the explanation. So Rav Yochanan kan b'bayis kan b'sada. As we continue to Mem Gimel Amud Aleph. So Gemara says like this: B'bayis nami. One second. You're telling me when you go in the house while you're tahar and you go in, so you both violations happen at the same time. Kivan de'ohel yade itztahiv ki oil kulei hai tamehu. So look in the Mefarsh. Amay chayiv shtayim. Why are you chayiv still by going into the house 2 times? Halo asin bahadadi. They're not exactly happening at the same time. Why? Dikivan de'ayil yadei. As soon as just your hand enters, the urchidi inchin shalhachi etamule. So you're walking, and while you're walking, your hand is in front of you, as a person typically will move their hands. So the first thing that enters into the room is your hand. And that what happens, you become tamei. The command de naga betumas hames shebifnim dami it's keilu like you actually touch the mace itself. And the reason we'll see in Taisus why will be elohavi adi al kuli guve. The isser of lo yavo is when your entire body enters. So it actually doesn't happen simultaneously. You become tamei as soon as one single limb enters into the area of the mace. We'll see why in Taisus. And you don't violate lo yavo until your entirety of your body is in. So since they don't happen at the same time, we should also say you're not going to be chayav twice on lo yavo. Says Taisus, the oil mace kemali tomedami. That if there is a mace in a room, it's not that you can't be within a few feet, but if there is ohel, it's like it spreads throughout the entire house, all the way up until that front door. And therefore, umiyad shehoishid yad b'fnim ki'ilu naga b'meis. As soon as you stick your hand in, it's ki'ilu like you're actually touching the mace. Yakatu l'krin b'lo yavo, and yet you have not yet violated again the issur of lo yavo until your body enters in. So again, that's the question. V'chi ayil kui hai tame. So once you entered, you're already tame, umuchul v'oimidhu. And therefore, you should not be chayiv, again, for lo yavo. So the question is, how do we answer kan b'sada, that kan b'bayis? That's not, being in the house is not a reason, because it's not happening b'vas achas. Ella, says the Gemara, Rabbi Lezer, you're right. Siraf yodai mishum tuma'ika mishum bi'aleka. At the time that you stick in your hand, the only thing you violated is becoming tummy, but not entering. Vasir gufa tuma ubiya b'hadi adadi kasu. But when your body and your hands enter at the exact same time, then that would be the time in which both of them would take place. So maybe you could say that, okay, so let's say you keep your hands straight. So therefore your body and your hands come in at the same time. So therefore Yavon and Bali Atami could actually still take place possibly at the same time if you would do that. That perhaps would be an answer, a way to be able to avoid this difficulty. Gemara says, well, one second. Well, a person, depending on how big your nose is, but regardless, and hopefully not any other part of your body, your stomach, your feet, but the first thing that enters into the room is your nose. So, okay, fine, we don't have to talk about hands, you're going to keep your hands straight, but still, when your nose enters the room, so then itself should be a problem. Says Taisus, Benachas Tuma. So the second your nose enters the room, you've become tame. But again, lo yavos until the rest of your body. So even though it's true, it's literally a matter of split seconds, but it's still not happening bahadi adadi, and therefore you're still considered to be tame already before lo yavo. So the Gemara has that difficulty. El Amarava Hichnes Yado. When it comes to sticking your hand in first, mishum tome ika mishum bialeka, it's true that at that moment, while you're walking, you're going to become tummy the second your hand goes in. Hichnes gufo, let's say you enter your body, so how does that answer this question? L'chayra, there's still a problem because your nose comes first. Well, then your nose is in the front of your face. Says Taisus, let's say you turn your head toward outside the house. In other words, you actually walk backwards, and the Rosh explained this more clearly. So again, what we're saying, well, how about a person is walking backwards? So that's not derech bia. So again, what he's basically saying is, if you pulled your head, not that you walk backwards, but hichnas gufo, that what you do is you push your head back and you push your chest and body out, so this way your nose will not be out, because as the Rosh actually explains, that if, again, kaifa rosh chutzabayis, that if you cover your head outside to the house, that in itself may not necessarily work, as he says. Let's before we continue with the Rosh, let's see one more line in the Gemara. So how about your toes, right? So what are you going to do? Even your toes, you can't, turn your foot upside down. And again, on this, the Rosh said that you cannot say that you walk backwards, and say derech bia. So the only time you would actually violate lo yavo is dafka if you would walk. You have to walk forward, and walking backwards is not considered to be walking. And therefore, again, even if you want to deal with the issue of your nose, you're not addressing the issue of your toes. And therefore, again, you're going to become your toes are going to be making you tame before you violate lo yavo. So finally, the Gemara gives an answer. El umarav paba kegon shenichnas b'sheda teva migdal. Let's say a person enters into this room where the mace is in a box, and this is an oil zorik, which we will say is shmei oil, which is actually a machlokis in Masechtas Erevin, but nonetheless, let's say that it does protect you while you're in this box. And then all of a sudden your friend comes and opens up the roof. So all of a sudden, both of these things are happening simultaneously. So your whole body enters in a proper room, in a box, and then all of a sudden they open up the box, and then all of a sudden both are happening. So that's an answer to question TA 18. How could you ever violate lo yavo? Hakoinim shenichnas kulo, once you enter in, kvar nitma, varihu mechul v'oimid. So one answer again is you enter in this box, and then all of a sudden they lift up the box like a jack in the box, and you pop out. So you violated both at the same time, and therefore that's why you would be chayav lo yavo. You'd be chayav twice. That's answer number one. Answer number two. Ma b'ravashi omer kagoin di'ayel kishu goises. Let's say you entered into the room, and the person was not dead yet. He was actually a goses. He was dying, but he wasn't dead. V'nafik nishmase, and the guy died. So adi yosef the tumo bia b'hadadikasyan. So at that time, you violated both at the same time. So even though you entered in while he was not dead, nonetheless, the fact is the issue of lo yavo is being in by an ohel atoma, and they're being in the same room as an ohel of a mace. So therefore, that in itself is also a violation. That's the second way of addressing this question. Okay, Tanrabanan lahechaloi. So the pasuk says lahechalo, in which the pasuk in its entirety is uyatalma bal ba'alma lahechalo, that a person is not allowed to make themselves tame. So we say ansha shiamus. That is only until the time in which the person actually dies. So what does that mean? This is referring to a kohen, not a nazir. That a kohen is not allowed to become tame, but it says mutulasik boy ve'enu oiver la mishum lichal ansha shiamus. So if a kohen allowed to be around someone who's very sick and dying? Yes. He's just not allowed to be around a mace. So therefore, he's not going to be mechalel until he actually would die. Therefore, goses is not able to make a person tameh. Therefore, again, this is talking about a kohen. The truth is, the same din applies to a nazir, the Mepharsh says. But again, in nazir, we're more strict in who he can come in contact with, as we'll see. Rabbi Omer b'moisam, we learn out from the word b'moisam. So that was according to the Chachamim ad shashiyamos. Rabbi Omer b'moisam yitma ad shiyamos. Now, b'may binayu. What's the chiluk? It seems like the same thing. Omer Rabbi Yochanan, yes. Mashmois darshanika binayu. They just have different psukim to reach the same conclusion that a goises is not going to be tamei mace, matam someone. Reish Lakish, no, goises ikaminayu. They actually do argue whether or not a goses is actually able to somehow make someone tamei. Because eventually, since he's a goses, we know soifuli oischol. He's eventually going to become a chol, so therefore he should fall into this pasuk l'hechaloi. So mandi yomer milhechaloi afil goses. Even a goses can cause you to violate this pasuk of loyatal mabamav l'hechaloi. Mandi b'moisam ad shiomos. In Goises lo. So mandi yomer mehechaloi. The one who says that he learns it out from mehechaloi, and therefore he says even a goses haksib b'moisam. B'moisam is mashma only once he's dead, not as a goses. So what does it mean as a goses? If he's going to be issue even while he's a goses, so why does he need to say when he's dead? Obviously. So meboyle look at Rabbi Desanya. Rabbi Omer b'moisam, when it says b'moisam in the pasuk in a matama, you cannot be matama to your relative. Of a matama beniginasam v'zivasam. So this is referring to a nazir, that the pasuk says that you're not allowed to become tamei even to your relatives. This is a nazir. A kohen hedyot is allowed to become relative to a zayin kroivim, but a nazir is not allowed to come in contact b'moisam. However, he's allowed to become tamei, which a lot of people don't think about. But a nazir, the issue of becoming tamei is dafka with a mace. However, if he comes in contact with someone who is has tumas negoyim, saras, or a zav. So not that necessarily that's something which you should try to become tummy from, just because it's allowed. It's the pasuk says that's what we learn out from this pasuk. So it's b'moy. So therefore, this is what they learn out. Lahechalo tells even a goses, and b'moisam is a nazir. There's only an issue of a nazir becoming tummy mace, but he's allowed to become tummy through the goyim or zav. He should also need to know this. So how does he know? Again, it's that he can be matam b'nigyasam b'zivasam. So he feels you could still learn out both from that pasuk. So if you say b'moisam, then it's dafka once a person died. So what does he do with the pasuk lehechalo? As we said before, if let's say someone has a mace on their shoulders and then they become tameh by touching another mace, he's not going to be chayav a second time because he's already mechol. He also needs that svara. How does he know yotza someone who's mechol v'oimid? So it's possible you can derive more than one thing from these psukim. Meisi Sad the Gemara asks a question. Adam eino matama. A person cannot become tame el ad shetetzi nafsho until the person is actually dead. V'afil migvid, even someone who's a gavid, which is someone who has his body. The way the Mafar says is chatoich levarov, that he has his limbs cut off and he has mortal wounds that he's basically bleeding to death in front of you. I feel goses. But the key here, it says even a goses. We see befarish that a goses is not going to make a person tameh. So Indian temui adanafka nashal. Indian eschule ha ischil. You're right. Everyone holds that a person cannot become tameh by coming in contact with a goses. But a goses, since he is, as the Mepharsh said before, since he is moments soflios chol, he's going to be a mechol, so therefore he's going to become a corpse, so therefore he already violate lo yachalo. So you've already profaned yourself, even though you haven't become tameh. Okay, let's see question 1. Tanabon lehechalo ad shashiyamos. Rabbi Yomi b'moisam yitam ad shiyamos. Maskinan b'gemar the Tanakama v'Rebbe kol echad memayit tarti mikra demaisi. Both of them warn out two things. So from each pasuk lehechalo. So let's just mark this all down. This is a long answer. Lehechalo zafuki mikvid. It's coming to exclude someone who has their limbs cut. And lafuki mish mechol v'oimid, also someone who is mechol v'oimid. So that is excluding that you're not going to become tameh or chayiv if you're already tameh. And even if the person is a gavid, you're not going to that body who is mortally wounded but he's still alive, he's not going to make you tameh. But moisam, according to at least one shita, is excluding a goises. That we're saying that b'moisam tells us ad shiomos in goises lo, or maybe a feel goises, even a goses, or again, according to this, is excluding a goises, and lafoki benigasam bezivasam. As we said, it's coming to exclude a person who is a nazir, that if he touches or becomes tummy through saras or zav, that's not a violation, that he's seiser his dinim of a nazir. Okay, let's continue now on Mem Gimel Amud Beis. Omer Rav Chisda, Omer Rav. So Rav Chisda says in the name of Rav, Nikta Rosho Shel Aviv Eina Matamalo. This is a little bit grotesque and hard to fathom, but imagine a person has his father's head was cut off. Let's say with a guillotine, it was chopped off. So in that situation, he's not allowed to become tameh to him. Now, what is this referring to? It can't be talking about Yisrael. So Taisa says it's b'koyin hedget ma'iri shemutal tamil aviv v'lo b'kohen gadol v'nazir. A kohen gadol and nazir are not allowed to become tamei to their relatives. However, a kohen hedjit is. But that's only if their body is intact. However, in this situation, not. Why? My Tamar Makra, because the pasuk says, aviv, and the entire pasuk is ki'im l'sher hakarve l'im l'aviv livno l'vitul achiv. The pasuk says that anyone who is close to you, namely your zayin karav, your 7 relatives, including your father, you are allowed to become tamei with. But it's b'zman shu sholem, b'lo b'zman shu chaser. That's only the time when the body is complete and not missing any limbs, or specifically the head. Not sure why it's dafka the head and not other limbs, but that's how it's derived. Omer ulei Rav Hamnuna el miata ka'azel bipakta dir aravos upaskua genavi l'reshe hachinamidol l'tamule. So he says, what if you have these people? They go bepakta. The Mafar says babika. They go into a valley. Dar ravos. Shiganavim v'listim atzuyim sham. That's a place apparently where there's a lot of thieves. Upaskua ginve l'reshe, and they end up cutting off the head. Hachanamidul tamula. So you're going to say that there's no din tuma because it's missing. Sarmalei meis mitzvah ka'amrit hashti shloimer. So if in fact we're talking about a situation in which there are a bunch of ganavim, and all of a sudden you find that someone cut off the person's head, so you're going to tell me that you shouldn't bury that person if you find their remains, your father's remains? Murray says, no, of course that's not the case, because that would be a case of a mace mitzvah, if it's in the middle of nowhere, and therefore you have an obligation to do that burial. Now, it doesn't make any difference as a Kohen Hedjit whether or not it's some stranger that you find their remains. You still have a chiyuv to do the burial. So certainly if it's your father, you should do it. So the fact is, that obviously is a different situation that we're going to be lenient. Question 2. And again, it's by a mace mitzvah. So where it says, "V'hai mace mitzvah," this is not really a case of a mace mitzvah. It's only some situation where there's no one to bury. So so the question is, what if you can call out to someone and they'll actually do it for you? So then it's not a mace mitzvah. So then the Kohen would not be able to do the burial. So says the Mefarish, if you would call out, someone would respond. So therefore, it's not a mace mitzvah, so the Kohen should not be allowed to bury this in this situation. The reality is that even though normally maybe you could hire someone to do the burial for you, but here you are finding the mace on the road. It's like you don't have anyone to do the burial. And the idea behind this is because it's not a normal place where you can find workers, because you're not familiar walking in the street and all of a sudden you find a mace, so you are the one who's responsible. You can't say, I'll find someone. So because it's not a makom shliach, it's not a place where you can readily find workers, so it becomes a mace mitzvah. And then certainly in that situation, Cohen would be able to do the burial even if the body's head was cut off. Meisvei. The pasuk says lo yatama. Now the whole pasuk is v'lachaiso tabsul hakrav eila v'ashul haisel ish lo yatama. So also, if it's your sister, assuming that she's not married, that would be the husband's responsibility. So then you would be able to become tummy for her, even though you're a Kohen. Lo hu matama. So you're allowed to become tummy for her. V'ena matama liva reha. But you're not allowed to become tummy for her limbs, says Mefarish. Shim nifrad mimena aver, and let's say she had her leg amputated. Ben b'chay ben b'moy, so when she's alive or dead, ain't a matamula, she can't become tummy for her. V'she'en ana matamula law v'lo al echad mishar kroivav al aver menachai. V'she'en yochel hachziru with kamoshihu matchila. So you're not allowed to engage in that form of a burial. Who Din says Mefarish Nami will Abram in a mace. If you have a limb of a dead body, Shein Bain Aver min a mace, Aver min a chai, Ella Basar Hapoirish. Okay. So anyway, so the din is that you should not be able to care for her remains if they are in limbs. We know a person, we just established, you cannot be matama for your father if it's an aver, if it's an aver menachai, if it's your father amputated limb, if you're going avol maxahu al etzim kisaira. However, you could, if all we're dealing with is the size of a bone, which is the size of a barley seed. Now, even though it's true, when it comes to an etzim kisaira, says the Mafar, says Taisus, l'koivra perish im nitma kfar l'shar haguf. If, let's say, you were already tameh from the rest of the body, so then you could already become tameh with the etzim kasaira. Even though etzim kasaira is matam b'magav b'mas, it's not tameh b'oil, but nonetheless, this is the din. So abu masahu al etzim kasaira. So my masahu al etzim kasaira, what does that mean? Lava memer di mechser porta. If a piece of the body is missing, so we see l'chayra, even if the body is chaser, you could still do the kvura. Whoa, hahi Rabbi Huda hidasan Rabbi Huda oimer la metama v'matama levareha. What does that mean? Shein matama al ever menachai shel aviv, that you're not allowed to become tameh from a limb of your father. And here's the key: of a matama hu ever min hameis shel aviv. But he actually holds you could become a matama by a limb of your father after he has died. V'sanyim. We learned Rav Kahana Rebbe Lezer ben Yaakov. What does he say? That matam avin matam le'ivarim, and everyone apparently holds like this. No one like Rabbi Huda, because it says like this. It says matam avin matam le'ivarim prat lekazayis min ames, that excludes a kazayis of a dead body, that you can become, it's animatam le'avarim. Prat lekazayis min ames, so kazayis netzel, the kazayis of liquid, umoli tarvid rekev, or a measurement of a full spoonful of dust of the body. Yachali etamo l'shedra l'golgoylis roy binyana roy minyana. You would think you would also not become tameh when it comes to coming in contact with the skull, the spine, the majority of the bones, or the large, or the bit more majority of the binyan of the bones. Ksiv yamarta lehem. The pasuk says yamarta lehem. Yamar shema Moshe emor kohanim and Aaron yamarta lehem. Lenefesh liyatama ba'amav. Haisav l'chakasav tuma acheres. It's coming to include an additional tuma. So it's which includes this. It says in the Mefarish. Since you're not matam levarim, kishoimer emer al kohanim b'nei Aaron v'yamarta lehem. Why does it repeat that? Haisav l'chasav tuma acheres. The b'shedra v'rabinyano can go and stay shukoyim, can go, or 125 of the 248 bones. Shiyachal atama, that they're able to also make a person tamei mace. Let's look in the rush over here. Hai tana several Rabbi Huda Rabbanan pligule have yanan kurabanan svirle. Avol matamal Abram and Amaze shel aviv perish alidei chazara im kvar nitma l'shar haguf avol chatchila might Rabbi Huda and yochel atama kibriyata. So let's continue on to Amud Aleph. So ha'isavacha kasiv tuma cheres. This is additional tuma when it comes to either Golgoylis Shedra Rabin Rabin Yacholi Tamu Shedra Golgoylis Rabin Rabin Yanai Shalacherim. You would think that when it says Lachoso, you're allowed to become tummy with these different parts of her body, but maybe not other people's. So Amarta Machayis Muchedes Shagufa Talibo Matamu Shedra Golgoylis Rabin Rabin Yana. So just like when it comes to her, the goof is totally on all these different parts, which is like the ikr of the body, these things, and therefore all these things, you are allowed to become tummy for her. So it says you're allowed to become tummy in all these different situations. So the answer is Hahi Nami Rabbi Hudahi. But Rab Diarma Ki Haitan. That's according to Rabbi Yehuda. But Rab holds like this Tan. The Sanya Masa, the story Shemei Sabim Shal Rabbi Yitzchak Beginzuk Uva B'Hoidihu Acher Shal Shanim. So he was notified after 3 years about his father, which obviously would mean his body had already decomposed, and therefore it's not Shalim. Uva Shalas Rabbi Shua Ben Elisha. So they asked these people, so even though maybe there's shitas that would say that it's allowed, but according to this, we see Maskana that not everyone holds this. And we continue in the Mafarish, certainly the body is chaser. So the din is that according to him, you would not be able to become tameh for your father in that situation. Okay. Let's see, maybe there's another question here. TB19, Ksibanazul Yitama Behem B'mosam. What do we learn out from B'mosam? So we saw this already. It's either to exclude it on a goses or gvid, or it's not muzar or shartumas chutz memes, such as negoyim or zov. Okay. TA 18. We saw that already. So either going into a teva or going in, or that was one situation, or the person was a ghost and then he died, then you violated both.